Contin. I am an associate director at Whitehouse Communications, but that's not what the presentation is about. The presentation is about taking stock of ESG legislation in the EU and opportunities and challenges for the industry. And you may wonder, why is ESG legislation and the European elections important to me? Brussels, the European institutions sound boring and sometimes best to ignore. But let me tell you that tonight, what I want to tell you about is why they do matter to you and why it's important that you go home tonight with 3 key actions. 1 is to stay informed, 2 is to be the solution, and 3 is engage in the process. But let me start from the beginning. So in 2019, when the European Union pledged to reach climate neutrality by 2050 and cut greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030. And the European Green Deal was the initiative that was going to achieve that ambition. Fast forward to today, 2024, where do we stand? So 2024 is a year of change. We have elections in about 64 countries, including the US, the UK, and the European Union. And the situation ahead of June 2024 has changed significantly since the last elections that we had in 2019, where students and youth movements took on the streets to call for governments to take action to tackle climate change. And that translated into the European Green Deals and a set of ambitious proposals touching upon a variety of sectors, including agri-food, transport, mobility, energy, and whatnot. And after that, 5 years today, we are faced with a different kind of protest. As a consequence from a multi-crisis, including cost of living, energy, inflation, we've seen European farmers on the streets marching and protesting against administrative burdens stemming from the EU legislation on sustainability. So against this backdrop, definitely the European elections are going to be quite interesting. And to give you some context, over the past 5 years, the EU has legislated very ambitious green proposals. And that was they were able to do that because of the coalition that brought together the centre-right and the centre-left and the liberals. But over the last couple of years, the centre-right has decided to change tack on their climate policy, and a lot of those ambitions and legislation has been watered down. So what we're seeing ahead of June, when millions of Europeans will go to the ballot, we definitely know that 55% of the European Parliament will be represented by brand new parliamentarians. We also know that the far right and the right side of the political spectrum is on the rise and will gain a lot of powers and seats. And we know that the Greens and the left will lose a lot of powers and seats as a consequence. So how's the current political climate, also ahead of the election, has been translated into the legislation from the last 5 years? As I said, there's been a shift in the last couple of years with the right taking a different stance on climate, and so reducing the ability to reach compromise during negotiations. And I have a couple of examples of legislation where we've seen that, with the packaging and packaging waste regulation, for example, where the last text that was recently approved had significantly lowered circular economy targets. Or the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. It's a proposal you may be familiar with that will require companies to look into their human rights and environmental impact on their operations throughout the whole supply chain. Since the initial proposal to what has actually been agreed very recently, we've seen that now fewer companies are covered, fewer activities, and overall the scope has been diluted. Similarly, Green Claims Directive, again, probably something that you're familiar with, a proposal that would look into looking into tackling greenwashing practices, currently still debated, but already been accused of being too burdensome for the industry who's already doing enough for sustainability and climate. And the last example, the natural restoration law, another important piece of law that will look into mandating the restoration of ecohabitat by 2030. That has been parked indefinitely because member states decided to remove their support. So against this bleak climate, there is some hope, and the hope is with innovation and with innovative solutions. And the reason I'm saying this is because European institutions are always on the lookout for companies and organizations that have a solution to tackle climate change. And from whether we're thinking of the technology to address carbon removal, for example, or the diversification of proteins, or digital solutions to support with ESG labeling and reporting, the European institutions want to work with the industry to create legislation that is fit for purpose. So you may ask yourself, why, as a UK company, a UK startup, should I care about this? And the reason is because by the virtue of the so-called Brussels effect, the EU legislation and standards extend beyond borders. So it's really important to keep an eye on what's happening on the continent. And the European elections that are coming up in June will also represent the beginning of a new era for policymaking, with essentially a lot of opportunities to be part of that change. So what I'm going to leave you with tonight is these three key things. One is be the solution. Two, obviously stay informed on what's happening on the EU side of things, and then engage in the process. Thank you so much.